this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin. Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Nowadays, I spend a lot of time going for walks with my wife. I do it for the exercise. I don't run anymore, and I do miss that. I miss that adrenaline rush that you would get. You just feel so good after you run, but my back and my knees, I just can't do it anymore. But I do enjoy walking. I do it for leisure and for exercise. But can you imagine you're 64 years old and you're walking to work every day? Now, I guess you could say it's a choice. Maybe you do have a car. Maybe you just want to take in fresh air. Who knows? But the subject of our episode today did walk to work on a daily basis. And you don't think that anything is necessarily going to happen to you en route to work. But the story I'm going to tell you today involves a lady that was not just simply found dead along the side of the road where she strolled to work every day, but hidden away inside of a culvert. And here's the thing. This didn't just happen a couple of weeks ago. This happened 40 years ago, and it is just now that this case has finally been solved. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. I think back to that time, Dave, 1982, and that's when people would still dress up many times. First off, to go to work, they didn't show up in their pajamas. They look put together, and the generation that we're talking about, 62-year-old lady, and she's working at a mall. I'm sure that she put on her finery every day, what she would refer to probably as her business clothing, and would go to work. She wanted to look presentable, probably had her hair fixed, her makeup fixed, had her jewelry just right, not thinking that anything's going to happen to her. But Dave, my gosh, after all of this time, these many years, and her body being found in a culvert, they finally have gotten this thing solved.
You know, one of the amazing things about the story of Velma Nesset is that she did walk to work every day, walk to and they pointed it out, walk to and from, and her coworkers loved her. She was known at the Permian Mall in Odessa, Texas, and they knew when to expect her. And when she didn't show up for work as normal on April 19th, her coworkers knew something was wrong. They didn't waste time. They called police. She's 64. She's usually here by now, and she's not. She walks back and forth to work. Help us find her. And they did. But what they found, and I think about a woman of that generation in that time, in her age, there was a pride and modesty about life.
Oh, boy. Yeah. Yeah, you're not kidding.
And when you mentioned being put together, I'm thinking about how she would have presented herself. And when I think of what happened to her, it's so disrespectful of human life. She deserved better.
Yeah, she did. And I'm glad you mentioned about relative to the disrespect that's shown. I think that probably next to a garbage bin being placed in a culvert where runoff goes, sewage goes, all these sorts of things, that in and of itself gives you an idea as to whoever perpetrated this crime had no value for her as a person, right? None whatsoever, because he did this to her, and it's so markedly disrespectful. I know that many times on Body Bags we've talked, or I have mentioned the idea of memorializing the dead, and you can tell a lot about the perpetrator's worldview by how they treat the dead afterwards. Did they put them in a state of repose in the bed? Did they cover them? Were their faces covered? We hear about face covering, all those sorts of things. Or did they just toss them away like garbage? And in this particular case, you're getting down to that level where, you have Velma, this lady that has lived a full life up to this point, and he discards her like she's rubbish, Dave.
It just kind of hit me at the age of 64 in 1982. That was an age of retirement. We didn't work like we do now, where, mid 60s was you're a senior. Your days are numbered. We didn't used to live like this. Now somebody dies at 64 and you're like, what happened?
Wow. Boy, they're young. Yeah.
And so
you think about that, and it is truly a different world. And also we have to keep in mind, I think that it's fascinating that she was still working, because,
right.
Back then you took retirement. Maybe it's SSI or whatever it is. I mean, granted, people have always worked beyond. Maybe she did this as a hobby. Maybe she did it because she liked to connect with people. And my gosh, as you well remember, in the 80s, particularly 82, the mall is where you go to connect. It wasn't. It wasn't just for young people. You had all kinds of people that would be walking through that mall over that period of time that you would interact with. And if she's single, she's living at home, it can be kind of a lonely existence. But if you're stimulated, you keep your brain stimulated by going to work every day, more power to her, man.
And not just stimulated, but walking to work, physically walking to work,
right.
Back and planning on that. That's not something people would do today. And not just because it's dangerous, because we're lazy,
Yeah.
I wouldn't do it. I mean, really,
No.
I wouldn't walk to the Dixie Mart at the bottom of the hill if that was my job,
Right. Yeah.
I'll hitch a ride, man.
Yeah, no. And that's the world that we live in at this point in time. And this is a different time and place. And I think that that's really important in the investigation of Velma's homicide, because the way things were done back during that period of time, and certainly the tools that were available to those investigators and scientists back then, are not the same as they are today. And, people always say that things were much simpler, back in the old days. Let me tell you, life was complicated back then, just like it is now. It's not that, our lives are any more difficult. We've just layered more crap upon it.
It's just
life was still, it's all relative. Life was difficult for them back during that time. And I remember 1982. My life was difficult during that period of time. I was going to college.
Me too.
I thought that it was, horrible and overwhelming. I didn't want to study. I didn't want to do all those things that I was tasked with doing, but you had to do it, right?
But Joe, where would you start with an investigation when you have a 64-year-old woman who is in physically good enough shape to walk back and forth to work at the mall? She has friends there that immediately call police when she doesn't show up on time, and they're able to locate her body, which, we're doing body bags, and you already know the end, that she was murdered. But where they found her body, Velma was found partially nude. She had been sexually assaulted and murdered, and her body was found in a drainage culvert.
Yeah.
What
and
does that...
Yeah, and one more. She's been stabbed to death, and that's something that is very intimate, and it goes along. You just mentioned she was sexually assaulted,
right?
Those two things go hand in hand, as far as I'm concerned, because it's I use the term intimacy a lot when it comes to homicide. Being shot from a distance is not intimate. Being stabbed or choked, that's very, very intimate stuff that you're talking about there. And where would you start? I'm glad you asked that question, because here's something I don't think I've ever mentioned before on body bags. Where I would start? I would find the shift supervisor and the beat cop that worked that particular zone. I'd put my hands on them and I'd say, who do you know on the street around here? Because you're not talking about somebody that has been buried out in the desert outside of town, if you know what I mean. Now you're talking about somebody that has been literally found in a culvert in Texas, and specifically in Odessa, Texas, which is out in West Texas. Who do you know? If you're talking to, and many times beat officers are some of the best sources of information, Dave. If you've got unknown questions, or if you have questions that need to be asked and answered, if you get that beat cop who daily has contact with everybody in that area, people that are wandering up and down the streets. You might have somebody that's suffering from mental illness that screams at every car that goes by, and he's had to pull over and talk to them. Maybe you've got a domestic beef that's going on with a family. You're always having to go out there. Maybe there's people that are losing children in that area. The beat cop literally has their finger on the pulse. And for me, there is no richer source of information than those individuals who inhabit that space on a daily basis. And we know that police work in shifts. So the people that you might see during, let's say, the day watch, all right, that might start at 6:30 and go until 2:30 every day, the people that inhabit that space are going to be completely different than the people that inhabit the space from, say, 2:30, the evening shift, from 2:30 until 10:30 at night, and certainly a lot different than the people that are out at 10:30 going to 6:30 in the morning. Completely different cast of characters that you're dealing with, because most people that have a job, well, during that early part of the day, they're at work, okay? Now, they'll come home in the evening. There might be domestic beefs that happen at that point in time, but they're probably going to go to bed. But then you got those people that are up and moving around at night. Well, why do they move around at night? I don't know. Maybe they're night owls. Who knows? But my point is that the beat cop is, people use the tip of the spear when you talk about military operations. They are the life's blood of information that flows into any investigation that occurs in a neighborhood, in approximation to a mall. And how many times do you think the cop that worked this area, maybe at that mall, had been called there because there were disruptive kids? People used to complain. You remember this skateboarding on the sidewalk during that period of time. Kids racing in the parking lot or cutting donuts. You got those people. And then you got the people that kind of loiter around. Maybe they're car thieves, or maybe they assault people in the parking lot and try to do stick-ups, or maybe they go into the store and they shoplift. And my God, you talk about a target-rich area, a mall. So there's all of these people that inhabit that space. Then we begin to think about Velma. My gosh, think about all of the people that she comes in contact with on a daily basis in a mall. She comes in contact with more people than most politicians do. And, and they just happen to cross her path. She doesn't know who they are. So that's what the police are looking at just to start with her. And it can lead you down some twisted paths, because let me tell you this. The police knew at that moment in time, when they have this lady who's in her 60s, she was supposed to be at work and she didn't show up. Not only has she been stabbed, sexually assaulted, but she's been sequestered away in a culvert where someone wanted to hide her death.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Lindsey Vonn, sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Ilya Malinin.
Redefining the sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Dave, I don't know if I've ever asked you this question, but I'm compelled to do it at this moment in time based upon the scene that this case takes place in. Are you claustrophobic?
I'm not.
I am. And I hate that about myself. I really do. And it has been one of the biggest distractions in my life. It's something I have to fight against every day. I don't like being on elevators with people.
Oh, wow.
I don't like it. I like to get off on and off as quickly as I can.
I use the
I'm
stairs.
not saying I'm going to run over an elderly lady with her shopping bags, get off, but I'm waiting. I don't want to linger. I was not cut out for the submarine service. I'll put it to you that way. I don't even like being on planes.
Right.
I don't like rebreathing other people's air, and then stuck in those filthy seats. I don't care how much they wash the covers on them.
No way.
And I'm not a germaphobe, but it's just all of that stuff, piles in on top. But Dave, I got to tell you, working, and I've had to do this, I've had to go down in manholes as well.
Mm-hmm. That's got to be a real treat for you.
It's very unnerving to work in a space like this. A culvert, of all things, is very, very difficult.
When I was living as a young boy, I grew up in Southern California, but I spent 2 years in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And being a boy who grew up where there's an asphalt jungle, there is no open space. To move to an area where you have the desert going up to the mountains and to Kirtland, it was beautiful. And by the way, lots of areas to go exploring. And I was at that age where when I saw the story about the culverts and I thought about the pipes and the cement, and we at that age would explore. And invariably we would start at a culvert. We would start at a man-made cement runoff, and it would lead you out to the wilderness to an area where it usually would dump into water, a stream, what have you. And we would get candles because we didn't have any money, little kids.
Yeah.
And we would get a candle and light it, and you would let the wax melt onto your hand, and at first it would burn, but then after you get past that, it shields it. And so you had your light, right? And we would go into those culverts with our little candles, and we were exploring, not thinking of anything horrid or horrible that could possibly happen. And when I saw this story, my first thought was, holy moly, what if this is the most disgusting thing to do to a person?
Yeah, it really is. And you think about, why a culvert? Well, I think that one of my thoughts is that if you're in a culvert, was she deposited there after she was raped and killed, or did the rape and knifing, stabbing take place within the culvert? Because if you're going to do this, and arguably she had to have been snatched.
Well, she was walking to work, so yeah.
I know, exactly. So you have to find a place in order to facilitate this. And if someone is going to be raped, if you're going to do that to this elderly lady, you would need an area of privacy. And what better area of privacy than a culvert to drag her down in there? And you can just merely leave her behind after you've done this. But, you think about being inside of a giant concrete cylinder, and first off, there's pros and cons to everything in forensics. Okay. Your con would be having somebody like me on the team that's claustrophobic. That's one of the biggest
I can see you standing out by the sunshine with your flashlight
Yeah. How can I help you guys?
And see, Joe, so from my mind, I was thinking that I didn't think about where she was snatched, where she was taken, and what all took place. My only thought was she was disposed of. I didn't think past that, but he would have almost had to been lying in wait. Here she comes, snatching her, dragging her down into the area because she's walking in a plain view sight. There's, she's not walking through that culvert to get to work.
Yeah, and this is where the term menacing comes up, because if she's stabbed, we know that he has an edged weapon with him. So all he has to do is grab her, threaten her with a knife. She's going to be compliant more than likely.
Wow.
And he it might be come with me. and he drags her down the culvert, and then hell follows after that.
I did not even think of that, Joe.
It's horrible stuff, and we talk a lot about dismemberment cases on here, and then we have this issue of sexual assault like this. For both of those things, a perpetrator has to have some level of privacy in order to facilitate it. Well, back to this idea of pros and cons. If you're within a culvert in this cylindrical environment like this, concrete culvert, the pro of this is that it's a pro and a con. It's a very tight space, obviously. Okay, so you're going to have difficulty working in there. However, because it is such a tight space, you have limited locations where an individual can make contact, and they're going to be touching multiple surfaces. So let's say that it's Odessa, so they don't get a lot of rain, brother. So let's say you have a layer of dirt or dust in there. If he places his hands inside of that culvert, you can get an impression out of just the dust that's left behind. And it also goes to activity. She would have been resistant. You can see scrapes on the surface of the interior of that culvert. If her shoes are scraping up against the side of it. And that's a powerful thing to take a photo of. They say many times, I've heard people say, why do you guys take so many photos at crime scenes? Well, just imagine, if you will, an individual that's being attacked, and they're fighting for their life, and they're wearing shoes, and they begin moving their heel across a surface like this. Again, very tight area. You're going to leave these kind of linear black marks that are behind. And I've seen them on scenes before where people are struggling. I've seen them where it transfers from the shoe to the surface. I've also seen them where blood has been spilled, and you can see the scuff marks in the blood too, which is equally horrible. But in that tight space, you have all of this activity that you can document. That's the pro here, because it's very limited. It's not like you've got somebody running about a house and chasing somebody. It's concentrated in that area. So this would, in fact, be an evidence-rich environment. The trick is, how well did you document that? And here's the other thing. We were kind of being lighthearted just a moment ago, but it's a serious thing about not everybody can fit into this space. And at crime scenes, what we do is we have a marshalling area where we get together before we actually enter a crime scene. And we will say, okay, this is your job. This is this person's job. And the next is this job. Well, just think about it. You cannot have a lead detective, a photographer, and maybe a crime scene tech in the space at the same time. It's an impossibility. If you do, you're going to destroy evidence. So you're going to try to document that body in place, and that includes measurements. It includes photography and any kind of trace evidence that has to be lifted, including fingerprints or things that are left behind in the dust. So you've got all of this dynamic working together here. And then there's blood evidence, a tremendous amount of it, because if she is stabbed, if she was killed there would be blood deposition all over the place. And the other thing is that whoever did this would have blood deposition on them as well, Dave.
Friday. Kick off the Winter Olympics in style with the opening ceremony from Italy, featuring a special performance by Mariah Carey. Celebrate the greatest athletes from around the globe as they come together to go for gold.
Sensational!
The opening ceremony of the Winter Olympics.
Redefining this sport.
Friday at 8 Eastern, 7 Central on NBC and Peacock.
Brother Dave, after Velma's body would have been removed from this culvert, she would have gone to the medical examiner's office. And by the way, little interesting factoid about Texas: they don't have coroners, and they don't have what are traditionally known as medical examiners in a sense that we normally think of them. The justice of the peace acts as the coroner in the state of Texas. Yeah. It's kind of an interesting situation. So they can either marry you or pronounce you dead, I guess. But yeah, the justice of the peace handles that sort of thing. One of the things that came to mind is that image of the Judge Roy Bean, sitting on his porch, and he's the justice of the peace. And so they would have gone to the forensic pathologist that was hired by the justice of the peace to do the examination in Odessa at that point in time. And, one of the things that's glaring, because, the notes actually refer to the fact that Velma, and this is key, was only partially clothed. So that means that her clothing has been disrupted. And anytime, particularly when I'm working cases involving females, or used to work cases involving females, if I saw any undoing of any of the vestments that anybody is wearing, whether it's an unbuckled belt, a missing button, a ripped blouse, an undone bra, an exposed breast, anything, for me, automatically, I'm going to hone in on that and we're not supposed to use the word assume, but in this case, I'm going to assume they have been sexually assaulted, because I only get one shot at this. So when she would have gotten back to the morgue, they would have done a standard rape kit on her. Now, remember, in 82, we weren't doing DNA at all. As a matter of fact, DNA would not pop on the surface until about 84, and that was actually in Great Britain with Dr. Alec Jeffreys, who was famously credited with solving the pitchfork cases in Great Britain. And to that end, that technology had not, made it there. It was novel at that point in time. We knew DNA, but we didn't fully understand the utility of it in forensic science. And so we were still very, if you'll indulge me here, we were still very analog back at that point in time. So when that body, her body, Velma's body, would have rolled into the morgue, this is kind of how the exam would have gone. We would have done fingernail scrapings, fingernail trimmings. We would have done hair pluckings. And this is something I haven't talked about, I know, on body bags. Did you know that we pluck pubic hair from a victim? And one of the reasons we do in cases of sexual assault is that if there is sexual contact by a perpetrator, we all know that we shed hair, right? Well, we shed pubic hair as well. What will happen? And I'm sorry, this is so over the top and I know really disgusting to many people, but you have to understand the practicality of this. If, let's say, a woman is being raped, there will be potentially not just a deposition of semen, okay, but you're going to have, perhaps you will have pubic hair that will transfer from the perpetrator onto the pubic hair of the victim. So you'll do pubic hair pluckings, and you also do pubic hair combings. There's a fine-tooth comb that comes in a kit, and you literally comb the pubic hair, and any loose hairs that come up, they're placed into a collection envelope, and those are submitted as well. And yes, so that people understand, there is when you look at the morphology of hair under a microscope, you can differentiate very well between pubic hair and, say, for instance, head hair. All right. And in certain cases, you can differentiate between, you can say that this hair does not come from this specific person. It may come from someone else. And now with DNA, if you get a root ball, you're going to be able to do a DNA profile. If you have the shaft, you can do kind of the mitochondrial DNA. I know that all
comes from the lab, but when you're out on the scene, how do you get the body in this place where she's partially clothed
Yeah.
How do you get that back to the lab? Because she's in dirt and muck and mire and whatever else is in the drainage ditch.
Excellent question. I'm glad you asked me this. And I've been asked this before. It's something I teach. Did you know that when we transport bodies of rape victims, their feet are always left elevated higher than their head? And the reason is if there's seminal fluid or anything else within the cavities of the body, we're not going to lose it. It's not going to roll out, because it does roll out. And so you keep the feet elevated. And we do this regularly in the medical legal world. And you try the best you can to keep the feet elevated, even in the morgue. Like when you place a body into a cooler and the body's going to be there overnight, you'll continue to try to keep the legs elevated. If you possibly can, you won't put them onto a tray. You'll put the body in a cool room on the same gurney, and you'll just change out the gurney, put a fresh gurney in the van, and then keep them on that gurney with the feet elevated, head down. That way, when it comes time to do the autopsy, you're going to be able to harvest as much material as you possibly can. And after you do the hair pluckings and combings and the nail scrapings and the nail clippings, then it comes to the kit itself. And if anyone's ever noticed at the doctor's office, maybe you've been sitting in your general practitioner's office and they've got the swabs, the long Q-tips with wooden handles. Well, back during this period of time, that's what we used in the morgue. And generally you would take like 4-5 swabs and insert them into the vaginal opening, rectal opening, and into the mouth as well. And you let them sit. And the reason you let them sit is you're wanting them to absorb whatever's there. And if you can pull out, we'll actually do a smear in the lab almost immediately. As soon as one of the swabs comes out, we'll do a smear on a glass slide. Set that aside, save the rest of the swabs. We'll do that for each orifice that the swabs come out of, and then hang on to the rest of the swabs, hoping that they're, to retain them. And that's all part of the rape kit, Dave. That thing that we do, that's part of collecting the evidence. The tragedy, though, that I have found is that you have rape kits that are out there that have been utilized for those that are still living, those individuals that survive sexual assault. And then you have postmortem rape kits. And for years and years, there has been, I hate to use the word epidemic, that term gets thrown around so cavalier, but there has been a real problem in this country with misplacing rape kits and losing them. And can you imagine the horror of this if you are a victim of sexual assault and you make contact with maybe the rape detective that you're working with or the DA and say, what's the status on my case? And they put you off, and then they might say, we lost the kit, or the kit's no good. So this thing that you've had to endure, this horrific event, the sexual assault, and then the humiliation of being examined by strangers like this after you've been traumatized and they can't keep up with the kit, or they've inappropriately stored it or something like that. And that's something that has happened. But, this case has got kind of a different outcome, doesn't it, Dave?
It's got two different ones, because it happened on April 19th, 1982. And, when we started off, she was recovered the day she went missing. She doesn't show up for work. They got right on it. They found her body right away. And so they did all of the things that they needed to do to get a conviction, or to at least get an arrest. And they did. Yeah. They arrested somebody right away. He actually confessed. He fit the profile for what they were looking for. Again, they didn't have all of the DNA testing we have today. They had sufficient testing, I guess, but they didn't have enough. But he confessed. And so it went to trial, even though he confessed. And at trial, well, he had recanted by then. And when it went to trial, there wasn't enough evidence to convict him.
Right.
So false confession, rather. And that caused a problem, because once they've got somebody arrested and charged and we're moving forward with the prosecution. He's already admitted it. Well, you're not really looking at anything anymore, I would guess. You know, you got to focus on getting a conviction on this guy, get everything we got. And
there's other cases happening, by the way.
Yes. Oh, yeah. The world doesn't stop because this happened. No. And we forget that. We forget. Yeah. I know I do. I'm thinking, Joe, how did you not know? And you're like, well, since this happened, we've had 18 others. Or however. And anyway, so they get that guy in court in 83. He is acquitted. So they're back at square one, even worse than square one because they had all their eggs in that basket. And the case went cold. It was now you're now a year and a half removed from the case. You don't get the conviction. What are you going to do? Well, it sat there for a while and nothing happened until Texas has a program, and it was in it's the DPS Sexual Assault Kit Initiative. This is where they use DNA testing and genetic genealogy on old kits that they have not solved. And once a certain amount of time passes or what have you, and a case is cold, they now have the money. It's federally funded to actually get these kits tested to try to find resolution. And that's what happened. This kit fit the profile. They had the information, technically speaking. They had saved it. And it fit where they could actually send it off to be tested. We've done shows about this with Othram using old materials like this. So it happens. The genetic genealogy, we've talked about that a lot. But Joe, what is it like to look at a kit that is 40 years old? And in this case, at the time of the test, it was in 2020 that they actually did the test. So think about it. 38 years since this woman was murdered at the age of 64. It's 38 years, man.
Well, first off, it's amazing that they still had the kit and that it wasn't trashed and done away with. So tip of the cap to them. And not only did they still have the kit, they stowed this kit so that it was still viable. Because let's face it, over time, the most damage is done by nature, and what happens relative to these very delicate samples that you have. And can I back up just for a second? I want to tell, because there's probably some of our friends that are listening and saying, well, if you did a rape kit back then, you're not looking for DNA. What are you looking for? You're looking for secretors. And secretors are that percentage of the population that
what is secretor? What is that? What is a secretor?
What it means is that there's a certain percentage of the population that literally secretes red blood cells into semen, saliva, fecal matter, sweat. And so if you can get a seminal sample from somebody, say like in a deposition on in a rape kit, and they're a secretor, then you can type their blood. And if they, the ABO typing that you did, but do you realize how narrow that band is? And so that's one of the things, because, the rarest blood type is AB pos. Okay?
What if you're not a secretor?
Then hard to do.
Okay.
Hard to do. All you can say is that there was semen here. And and we're talking about years and years ago. I'm not talking about in the days of DNA.
We're taking about this.
Misconstrue. Yeah. And then they're going to look, and I talked about the hair, for instance. They're going to look and see, back then they would simply assess the hair by morphology. They'd say, okay, based upon what we're grossly seeing under high magnification, this is a cat hair or a canine hair, or it's a human hair. And what type of human hair is it? Well, female hair has been dyed, and you can actually, which is something that's quite striking. If you've ever seen somebody that has dyed blonde hair and the roots are black, when you see that demarcation in there, that borderline in there, it's striking, on a microscope, for instance. But that's really all they had. And now we're in it's a brave new world now, relative to DNA. And when they did this initiative with the rape kits, which to me is one of rape kits, let's see, how can I say this? Unutilized or poorly stored rape kits or lost rape kits and unidentified bodies are two of the biggest tragedies in America in forensics, as far as I'm concerned. You'll never convince me otherwise. These things that, are unknowns and still unknowns to this day. And now we've got this fantastic tool that we can utilize. So you've got all the while within the CODIS system, which stores, which is where we store, it's the combined DNA index system, where you have all of these cases coming in. And if you run somebody through CODIS and they are say it's an offender that's mandated to give you a sample, and you have unsolved cases there, they can go in and do a comparison. Bazooka Joe has committed this horrible crime, or we suspect that he has. Does he pop up on CODIS? Well, we have his DNA. We're going to compare it to any of these unsolved cases, because you've got two categories in CODIS. You've got what's called the known base, and you have the forensic base. And the forensic base are those cases that are open. No one knows who they are. They're not in the CODIS system. And so they're just out there floating. And what you want to find from a DNA perspective is a thread that goes back. And the beauty of CODIS, theoretically, is that if you've got an offender that's committing multiple crimes all over the place, maybe they're serialized events, you can actually geographically track the movements of this person based upon these sexual assaults or whatever it is they're engaged in, where, they're in Mississippi, Louisiana, Arkansas, Texas, or Oklahoma, and they're moving around. And do you remember when we covered Samuel Little? Oh
my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, and he had killed people for years and years and years. If you could, and he strangled everybody. I don't know if you remember this, and he remembered their faces. He could draw them.
He drew the pictures in his cell.
Absolutely chilling, man. And if you, like Samuel Little, if you had him out of a DNA database and you could plot that on a map, Dave, where all of these known cases were, where if you could go back and plot those, all these attacks, if they had gotten samples from these, Dave, the map would be just absolutely illuminated over this wide geographic area, because he allegedly traveled everywhere from the West Coast to the East Coast, north, south.
Born in Georgia.
Born in Georgia.
In LA.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so that's how CODIS helps. But in this case, the Texas, and there's a couple other states that are involved in this, maybe multiple of them, because there's federal funding for it. You've got these rape kits that are gathering dust, just sitting on the shelves. And Dave, that's the grand salvation in all of this. That's what turned this around, because it's because of a kit that was performed back in 82 that they were able to actually determine who it was that, in my opinion, took Velma off of the street, drug her into a culvert, raped and stabbed her to death, and then abandoned their body.
Got away with it. And he's been walking the streets ever since then. I guess my big question to the authorities in Texas, what's dude been doing since then? How many are there any other cases? Because this is a bold thing he did, Dave. I've been looking this up, trying to see what I can find on Billy Wayne Ludwigson, who is now 62 years old. He is now 2 years younger than Velma when he murdered her.
And something.
I'm not even having to do allegedly, because when Billy Wayne Ludwigson was faced with, they did genetic genealogy. They found him in Colorado, and the police were able to have a airtight case and sat down with him. He ended up confessing. Okay, they had the DNA, they had everything. Well, the man is 62 years old, and they went back to the family and talked about options for sentencing. He's going to plead guilty. What are we going to try to do here? And this is where we don't know all the facts. We only know what we're told. And he was sentenced to 20 years in prison for this crime that took place back in 1982.
Again, a tip of the cap to law enforcement in Odessa and the Texas Rangers in particular here for staying on this case after all these many years. But just for a moment, let's consider Velma's family. All those years, for right after her death had occurred, there was a glimmer of hope that the beast that had done this to her, this woman that walked to work every day at a mall, had been taken off the streets, but yet that was yanked away from them. But now, I can't even in my wildest fantasies imagine what it would be like to have that knock at the door after 40 years and someone comes to you and says, guess what? We've got Velma's killer. All those years missing her, the Thanksgivings, the Christmases, the birthdays, the anniversaries. But now, maybe, we know that there will never actually be closure, but maybe, on one level, some resolution to a mystery that has now been solved involving a woman found in a culvert in Odessa, Texas. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.